heard of the Loch Ness Monster. But is Nessie just a poster child for a whole host of watery weirdness? Some say their cousins live and breed in lakes, rivers, and seas all over this planet.
The overwhelming mass of evidence indicates that there is no possibility that this is fraudulent. These animals are extremely rare, but as I say, they're there.
I believe I saw on that occasion and subsequent occasions an unknown animal that dwells in this lake that is yet to be classified by science.
But there's a small problem.
It's not like there's been any bodies found. You have to sort of ask yourself, why do these things thrive in the absence of hard evidence?
Bring me a specimen. Scientists like to see evidence of things. They like to see legitimate, believable evidence.
What is that?
How then to account for sightings in the thousands?
Maybe if you imagine a monster snake, just, it stuck its humps out of the water.
All of a sudden, this little black head sticks up out of the water, opens up its mouth, and it started growling at us.
Is it possible giant unknown reptiles still ply our waterways, living in depths that science has yet to penetrate? Examine the evidence with believers and skeptics alike. Photographs and videos showing what appears to be an immense serpentine animal, strange sonar readings, and huge globs of flesh that wash up on beaches, as science and the supernatural collide in the murky depths of lakes, seas, and imaginations. Monsters of the deep have always been with us. The manifestation of our terror of and temptation for an aquatic world beyond our reach. But by the 20th century, it seemed that everything under the sun and the waves had been discovered. That the age of exploration and science had slain our deepwater dragons. Then a weird thing happened. Occasionally, the modern seas spit forth something totally foreign, unexpected. Something like the weird coelacanth, a fish that was supposed to be extinct for 65 million years. Or a bizarre shark, the megamouth that blew marine biology's collective mind in 1976. While real monsters emerged from the seas, the legends of lake monsters seem to be enjoying a resurgence. It all started with a beautiful, forbidding lake in the Scottish Highlands. The first modern sighting of the Loch Ness Monster went on record in 1930, but it wasn't until the spring of 1933 that Nessie announced herself with a vengeance.
When did you see it and where?
Right here at the southwest end of Loch Ness.
What was it like?
Oh, very like a swan, long neck, small head, and one big hump about 30 feet long.
Just had one big hump and a head something like a dog.
What was it like?
Like an elephant's back or an upturned boat.
Over the summer, in one encounter after another, people described seeing an enormous, prehistoric-looking animal with a long neck and snake-like head thrashing about in Loch Ness.
Many people see this as nonsense.
It's not rubbish. I saw it and I believe in it now.
Nessie sparked a media frenzy and a lot of extremely iffy photographs, followed by one very compelling photograph. But more on this later. Since Nessie's spectacular debut, she has spawned an enormous outpouring of sightings around the world. In North America, Champ in Lake Champlain, and Ogopogo in Lake Okanagan, Morgar off the coast of England, and even the Lake Sturgeon monster in Sweden, who has recently been put on the endangered species list. Today, on the Pacific coast of the American continent, hundreds of sightings and no body. What to make of it?
It does not lead automatically to the idea that if enough people tell the story, therefore it must be true. They function, in essence, outside of science as we understand it. They function in the realm of myth or fable or fantasy.
As a scientist, I can't believe my fellow scientific vertebrate people are not doing anything about this very challenging scientific problem.
One of the things that lake and sea monsters do have in their favor is a long history of sober, sane, and unshakable witnesses. John Kirk, an employee of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, has sighted the alleged monster in Lake Okanagan in British Columbia, Canada, many times.
And I witnessed, first of all, a very large, what appeared to be reptilian head swimming in the middle of Okanagan Lake. And immediately behind it was a very long neck, and then ultimately a succession of about 4 or 5 humps.
Tyler Ennis, a trained biologist and the son of a commercial fisherman, saw something eerily similar off the coast of British Columbia.
The body looked like it was just consistently rolling through the water. There was about 6, 7 humps. The humps were out of the water by at least 3 or 4 feet. The thickness of the body was at least a foot or so thick. I watched it for about 20 seconds or so, give or take, and then it went underneath the water.
Bob Iverson also grew up on the sea and spent his summers helping his dad fish these British Columbian waters.
And all of a sudden, these 3 great big humps come out of the water, and they look like big truck tires. And they're gone. And then they're back. 3 again, and they're gone. I'd never seen anything like that.
And even a series of terrifying encounters in the San Francisco Bay, California, witnessed by twins Bill and Bob Clark.
It actually came towards us and growled at us. I was going to get out of the car, but because Bill screamed at me not to go out, I realized that, well, it isn't worth getting killed. I was afraid if he went to the edge of the water that it would grab him. You're looking at it in your mind because your mind doesn't think. Sea serpent.
We'll take a closer look at such amazing sightings later. But first, let's return to the mother of all lake monsters, Nessie. 70 years after the Nessie craze began, there are still sightings at the loch.
I suppose the standard answer to most people is that if you want to see the Loch Ness Monster, you spend 3 hours in the pub and you drink 1 or 2 good local Scotch malt whiskies. But I hadn't been drinking. No, definitely something alive.
I saw the classic 3 humps. I never thought that I would. This was 3 distinct humps, and the thing was that I watched it for 15 minutes, and it was swimming against the current, slowly, but it was moving against the current.
The first recorded sighting of the Loch Ness Monster goes all the way back to the 6th century, when an Irish monk was said to have chastised the vicious creature as it surfaced and ordered it back into the depths. But it wasn't until the string of sightings in the 1930s that Nessie hunting began in earnest. The London tabloids, naturally, were crying out for a photograph. As luck would have it, a local man, Hugh Gray, got the first shot, creating a sensation in the world press. But take a close look. Do you see a monster or something else? We'll get back to this. It was a grand time for monster lovers who flocked to Loch Ness, including a London surgeon named R. Kenneth Wilson, who in 1934 captured this. A classic shot of Nessie, with her sinuous neck and head in periscope position. This iconic image was immediately dubbed the surgeon's photo. That a doctor had taken it meant it had to be real. The photo fueled speculation that Nessie was in fact a holdover from the age of the dinosaurs called a plesiosaur, an aquatic reptile that was supposed to have been wiped out 65 million years ago in the great dino extinction. But could her watery ways and the deep mountain-sheltered refuge of Loch Ness have kept a relic plesiosaur population alive? Rewards for Nessie's capture inspired monster lovers to new heights of silliness. Take, for example, this optimistic bunch, who in 1934 built a 35-ton steel cage to hold the beast. The legend of Nessie reached its zenith in the 60s and 70s, and even scientists were drawn into the hunt. In 1970 came the American invasion, led by Dr. Robert Rines and a team of scientists from the Academy of Applied Science. Using new side-scan sonar technology, they reported readings indicating underwater life forms 10 to 50 times bigger than any known fish in the loch. Rines would also release these contentious computer-enhanced photos taken underwater with motion-control cameras, the famous flipper shot and gargoyle head, all of them intriguingly plesiosaur-like. Even National Geographic got into the act, sending an all-star team led by oceanographer Bob Ballard, who would eventually discover the Titanic, and renowned underwater photographers Emery Christoph and David Duboulet. They had a high-tech research ship and sonar-triggered underwater cameras, banks of strobe lights, and underwater amplifiers broadcasting the sound of fish in distress. For their troubles, the Geographic team got some great shots of shoes, wine bottles, and tea kettles. They did put one Nessie mystery to rest. A suspect skeleton turned out to be a log. Despite these many setbacks, believers could not help but cling to that one lovely profile of Nessie, the so-called surgeon's photo. Then came the confession that shocked the lake monster world. For 60 years, the surgeon's photo of the Loch Ness Monster stood the test of time. Then, in 1992, a man named Christian Sperling made a stunning revelation. The photo was the brainchild of his stepfather, Duke Weatherall, a flamboyant big game hunter whom the Daily Mail had sent to Loch Ness to capture Nessie on film. According to the stepson, when Duke failed to come up with the goods and the paper fired him, he decided to settle the score. First, he needed a toy submarine. Then, he fashioned a Nessie-shaped head and neck to fit snugly over the conning tower. When his Nessie was seaworthy, he and his younger son, Ian Weatherall, launched their monster in the shallows of Loch Ness.
The water cold? A little further. Right, like that. That's perfect. Just like that, son.
Weatherall took the shot.
Think we got it.
And that was that.
Let's go.
The majestic head and neck were all of 12 inches. Apparently, Weatherall convinced London surgeon Dr. Kenneth Wilson to claim the photo as his own. Perhaps he was too overwhelmed by the publicity it generated to recant. And what about that first photo by Hugh Gray? Take a second look. A little twist of the contrast levels reveals what looks suspiciously like the head of a good retriever dog, doing what it does best, swimming back with a stick.
You look at the photographs without the framework that says, this is my version of the Loch Ness Monster, you would never see these things as monster photographs. You'd see them as bad pictures out of focus of anything, but not a giant reptile.
In scientific terms, Nessie's long reign at the top of the lake monster food chain is beginning to work against her. After 75 years of looking, why hasn't she turned up? Sonar studies of the lake haven't had a hit in more than 5 years, and some of the most devoted Nessie fans think her species may have gone extinct. She was the last of her kind. But even if Nessie has gone to her final resting place somewhere on the floor of this spectacular loch, the tale of lake monsters is only beginning. We're headed across the big pond to North America, to Lake Okanagan in British Columbia, Canada. Where Nessie had dozens of sightings and a handful of photographs, this lake's supposed monster has been sighted hundreds of times, and there's even video to boot. Vaster and deeper than Loch Ness, Okanagan is a perfect monster's lair. John Kirk works for Canada's Royal Mounted Police. He's the author of In the Domain of Lake Monsters. He's collected hundreds of reported sightings. But more than that, he is certain that the creature in Lake Okanagan is for real, because he has seen it with his own eyes. the monster's popular name, Ogopogo.
Approximately 17 years ago, I had the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life, where I beheld for the first time an animal that wasn't catalogued by science.
In August of '89, lightning struck again. This time, Kirk saw 2 lake serpents only 200 yards offshore. He said he could see through the arches of their serpentine bodies as they moved across the lake.
I believe I saw on that occasion and subsequent occasions an unknown animal that dwells in this lake that is yet to be classified by science.
There is one scientist who has tried to classify what eyewitnesses like John Kirk are seeing, marine biologist Ed Bousfield.
If you see a large marine animal at the surface with 2 or more humps in tandem, one behind the other, there's nothing else it can be. It's Cadborosaurus.
Meet Cadborosaurus wilsey, a creature compiled by Bousfield from hundreds of eyewitness descriptions. A reptile that can breathe underwater, growing up to 70 feet long, with a horse-like head, snake-like body, front flippers, and a top speed of up to 40 knots. In the minds of most scientists, a complete fantasy. According to Dr. Bousfield, a real sea serpent that became a lake monster by accident.
They originated in the sea and migrated up the rivers, following the salmonoid fishes on which they prey. 70 years ago, there was a great period of dam building on the Columbia River. They are now landlocked in these lakes, like Lake Okanagan.
So is this what people are seeing in Okanagan? John Kirk thinks it's possible. He's tracked hundreds of sightings over the years of a reptilian, serpent-like creature ranging from 30 to 100 feet in length and swimming at phenomenal speeds.
Yeah, there it is over there.
But now the crack team of skeptical investigators Ben Radford and Joe Nichol are hot on Ogopogo's supposed trail. Flying over the Okanagan Valley, they can't help but notice that the lake is, well, remarkably serpentine in shape. This may not be a coincidence, as we'll see later.
There are lots and lots of stories, and it's a big and beautiful and deep lake, larger, I think, than Loch Ness.
In the case of Ogopogo, one thing that's interesting about it is the variety of video evidence, unlike many of the other lake monsters. There are a handful of videos of Ogopogo which I think are worthy of merit.
Radford is the managing editor of the Skeptical Inquirer magazine. He and Nichol, a veteran investigator, are working on their latest book, a myth-busting take on the evidence for lake monsters around the world. They have come to Okanagan to try and get to the bottom of it all.
Oh, we got a gorgeous day, though.
Radford and Nichol joined Kirk on our Ogopogo research boat. It is an unusual pairing of skeptics and advocate, ensuring a lively debate over the evidence throughout their search.
What would prove to you that Ogopogo does not exist?
You'd have to drain the blooming lake, and we'd have to see there was nothing there.
Well, the difficulty we skeptics have.
While a handful of Ogopogo researchers like Kirk claim repeated sightings, it is hard to fathom how veteran boat captains, such as Glenn Kohali, can spend years out on the water without ever seeing the beast.
I haven't personally seen anything. Occasionally I'll see a phantom wave. The lake could be totally calm, nothing moving, and all of a sudden you'll get this wave going across the lake without any real reason for it. There's no boat traffic, and for sure, if you just take a glance at that, it looks just like Ogopogo, just like it.
The phantom wave, called a seiche, is common to narrow, deep lakes like Loch Ness and Okanagan, the same lakes that are reputedly homes to cryptic creatures. So, is this footage, shot by John Kirk, proof of a lake serpent in Okanagan, or just a serpentine rogue wave? Approaching Rattlesnake Island, the valley narrows over a seismic fault line. Here, the lake plunges below 800 feet in depth. We have reached the home, according to ancient Native American legend, of a ferocious, man-eating lake monster.
The First Nations people really traversed the lake without bringing some kind of small animal with them which they could throw into the lake to appease the lake demon. If you failed to do this, you incurred its wrath.
Ogopogo hasn't attacked a human in recent memory, so perhaps it's undergone a personality change. In any case, our intrepid divers prepare to investigate the dragon's lair.
Bigger stuff tends to usually hang out on deep walls where it's got the room. So that's why we've picked this spot, Squally, to dive, because it's got that kind of depth.
If Ogopogo does exist, there must be dozens of them in the lake in order to maintain a breeding population. But in a lake this size, the chances are still fantastically slim of running into one. Dive leader DJ Swanstrom has picked the waters around Rattlesnake Island to improve his chances.
And I mean, this is a deep lake. Does it have the potential to have big stuff? Oh yeah, I mean, if it's going to be big, it's going to be in a lake like Okanagan.
What kind of animal are they looking for? If Ed Bousfield is right, they won't be encountering the plesiosaur that long reigned as the top candidate for lake monsters like Nessie. Instead, his Cadborosaurus is much more serpentine, but with a strange pair of front flippers and a fan-like tail. The divers won't descend much more than 100 feet. Beyond that, it gets too dangerous and too dark. That leaves a lot of room for Ogopogo to hide in. After a fruitless search, with air running low, the divers return to the surface.
It's just Lake Okanagan. It's tough diving, not much to see, and not a lot of life down there.
Maybe sonar, which can penetrate deeper than humans dare go, will prove more fruitful.
270.
Sonar operator Daryl Van Dura scans the underwater rift with sound waves.
Keep coming up on it.
The images on the screen are formed by those sound waves echoing back off of solid objects in the water.
Sonar's a little tricky to work with. It's not photographic imagery, it's computer imagery, so unless it's something that you can obviously tell, like it's a ship or an airplane or something, you would have to go back and verify that hit. And with a living creature, it's not likely to be there again when you go back with cameras or divers.
But a few years ago, an Ogopogo expedition did record this image, showing what appears to be a 45-foot serpentine shape a few feet off the lake bottom.
40, 50
Some
feet.
claim this must be a biological entity.
One question that I would pose...
Vandura has another theory. He often uses his sonar equipment to salvage sunken trees, and thinks the alleged Ogopogo image looks suspiciously familiar.
It could be a tree trunk of a gnarly crooked tree, which we have a lot of in this country. That would be the first thing that would come to my mind.
As we're about to see, the evidence for lake monsters is something like a Rorschach test. One man's monster is another man's tree or wave or really big fish. But let's take a look at the very best video that Ogopogo has to offer.
What is that? No, they don't.
What elevates Ogopogo above your average lake monster is that it has been captured on film and video, not just once or twice, but many times. Over the years, one woman has taken on the task of sifting through it all. Arlene Gall.
They've seen the creature and have had an experience. They become believers for life.
Her house doubles as a makeshift museum. And as Ben and Joe peruse her archive, they find a treasure trove of fuzzy photos, old film, and home video. They have hit the lake monster mother lode. For an elusive creature, Ogopogo is remarkably camera-friendly. There are perhaps dozens of photos, films, and videos claiming to show the creature. Not all the moving images are easily dismissed. Arlene shows us the three most celebrated examples.
People are reporting as being Ogopogo.
In the summer of 1980, Larry Thal was filming his kids enjoying a lakeside holiday at Okanagan, when an excited crowd gathered on the beach, pointing to a disturbance about 100 yards out in the water.
I have no idea of the size of this creature, but it's extremely large, it's extremely long. And as we have no whales or submarines in Okanagan Lake, I don't have any other explanation other than what people have been seeing out there.
One thing that intrigued me most about this film is that you do have the bow wave, you know, the crest is coming off of it. It seems to me that it's obviously some sort of living animal.
Curiously, the alleged monster was reported to have been visible for 45 minutes, but Thal took only this 10 seconds of footage.
He decided that he was only going to take a small portion because he wanted to save the rest of the film for his family, and of course this really upset me.
Undaunted, Arlene shows us the Damara video shot in 1992. Here, in a portion of the video, is what appears to be a serpentine creature moving through the lake.
Look at the way it swims. I get very excited every time I see this because I've been waiting for years to have some type of visual.
Why could that not be 3 smaller creatures?
The way it's moving, it seems to be thrusting itself through the water, and I'm just watching the way it swims. That's the reason why I believe it's one animal.
And then, in another sequence, what looks like multiple heads swimming in the water. Suddenly, a ski boat enters frame on a collision course with the suspect lake serpents. The boat takes an evasive turn, and the skier goes down.
You see it actually in interaction with people, with humans, which is something that you rarely get. So I think it's certainly valuable in terms of that.
Finally, the classic film shot in August of 1968 by Art Folden. These first moving images of the alleged lake serpent caused quite a stir.
I'm not sure what speed it would be traveling at, but it's going pretty fast as far as I'm concerned.
The Folden film attracted us not because it's good quality. It isn't.
It's pushing water. So
we've looked at it repeatedly because so much has been made of it. It's supposed to be some sort of, for some people, almost a holy grail.
It's very long.
Cryptozoologists estimate that the creature in the film is 300 yards away and 70 feet long. Their conclusion? That it's simply too big and moving too fast to be a known animal.
He was looking along here. This guardrail would not have been here.
Ben and Joe know from experience that these monster-like estimates are often inflated and set out on the road to retrace Folden's steps. They want to try and get a more accurate picture of the distance, size, and speed of the so-called monster in Folden's film. The first task for Ben and Joe is to find the vantage point from which Folden shot the film.
Yeah, this could work. Way back. This could be comparable.
Yeah.
Using a still image from the film and with the help of lake monster researcher John Kirk, the team agrees on a likely spot. They take a bead on the far side of the lake for reference.
All right, so the idea is that we're going to have surveyors up at the highway site, also down at the shore and on a boat there. And we take GPS coordinates of each place, and then we get the distances measured at different intervals, 20, 50, 75, 100, and 300 yards. Questions, comments? No.
The 30-foot research boat is placed out in the water for scale.
And the rod's at 3.6 meters.
And a survey team with laser equipment is on site to size up the boat at regular distances from the shoreline.
That's pretty good right there. Okay, we're going to take a picture now.
When the boat is placed at a distance of 300 yards, the original estimate, it is immediately clear to the investigative team that the mysterious object in the water wasn't nearly that far out. Their new estimate is that the creature was more like 80 feet from the shore and had to be much smaller and swimming at a considerably slower speed. Kirk, Radford, and Nickel agree. The monster wasn't nearly as monstrous as cryptozoologists originally thought. Their science, however, is less than exact and leaves room for interpretation.
We're used to looking at frame of reference and everything.
It hasn't dissuaded me that there's an unusual creature in there, but what it has done today is to shrunk the size from the initial estimate way smaller than the 60 and the 70 feet that they were positing back in 1970, and I would say that was smaller by half, at least. So 30 to 40 feet maximum.
You could almost say it's an incredible shrinking lake monster.
But I still see it as being significantly larger than any unknown fauna in this lake, significantly.
But how much of that dark streak is the monster or the creature, and how much is its wake?
Joe and Ben head off into the sunset. Their expedition hasn't changed any minds, but then again, they didn't expect it to.
You have to sort of ask yourself, why do these things thrive in the absence of hard evidence? You know, it's not like there's been any bodies found. So why do people keep it? And part of the reason people keep it is because they like the idea. People want lake monsters.
Lake monsters really function almost like giant rubber ducks. They're unsinkable. You push them down and let go of them and they bob back to the surface.
John Kirk's monster is diminished, perhaps, but his faith is unshaken.
I'm a witness to this myself. I have seen the phenomenon, and I know what I saw quite clearly. I'm not deluded in any way, shape, or form by what I saw. It's so easy for people who have never had a sighting or who use the same old hackneyed saw every single time. Eyewitness evidence is unreliable, in which case we should disband our entire judicial system and free all the prisoners from jail.
We've got one more avenue of investigation to pursue before closing the file on Ogopogo. How will the lake monster videos stand up under the scrutiny of forensic video analysis? Time to bring in the man who trains the FBI in such matters. We brought in Grant Fredericks, a forensic video consultant to the FBI, to see if he could make head or tail of all the video evidence for alleged lake monster Ogopogo.
When we look at videotape, we often see that the videotape shows us something different than a witness has stated. And it's not that they're being insincere, it's just that they may have their own personal biases. The camera doesn't have a bias.
First, he analyzes the Ogopogo film shot by Art Folden in 1968 on grainy 8mm film.
I thought this was very interesting. I was actually kind of compelled on this, but there's clearly something causing something happening in the water.
Fredericks keys on a sequence perceived to be a bow wake, followed by a dark object, the alleged lake monster, moving through the water.
We can see that there's a light object in front of this darker object. This object is quite reflective, very, very consistent with the side of a silver fish.
Fredericks has done a lot of fishing in this neck of the woods. He knows that a big, bright fish followed by a long, dark wake can give the wrong impression.
I think if one were looking for a monster and saw this, that monster would be in that person's mind's eye. It's not on the film.
But what about the more recent Damara video shot in 1992? This video had even skeptics scratching their heads.
There appears to be pretty aggressive tidal movement sort of in this area. This is very consistent with debris from a fallen tree in the water, because the objects, they very slowly sort of bob up and bob down.
Grant points out that the objects don't react to the boat, and the water skier doesn't react to the objects.
I don't think that I would be that calm if I'd fallen among a group of monsters now.
And as for the Thal film?
I don't think this one's a problem in explaining it. You know, this has all the characteristics of waves moving. I don't see anything that would tell me that this is something out of the ordinary.
Scientists often point out extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And as yet, Ogopogo falls far short of absolute proof. But even if Ogopogo and its many lake monster cousins around the world don't exist, we still haven't ruled out the possibility of another kind of monster of the deep. The sea monster. After all, in our vast oceans, there is a lot more room in which a cryptic animal can hide from the prying eyes of science. And in fact, mysterious things do wash up on coastlines with fair frequency, like this giant mass of gelatinous flesh found on the shores of Chile in 2003. Inevitably, these fuel the hopes that a sea monster such as the legendary giant octopus has been found. Like most suspect sea monster flesh, a piece of the Chilean blob eventually made its way into the lab of Dr. Skip Pierce at the University of South Florida.
We've had blobs really shipped to us from all over the world, usually in Ziploc bags, preserved in all sorts of things from rum to formaldehyde. They usually smell bad,
Dr. Pierce, a molecular biologist, has tested samples dating back to the late 1800s, like the St. Augustine monster and the infamous Tasmanian blob.
By launch, land, and in the air, we search for a sea monster. This is the Pylon River on the rugged and only partly explored west coast of Tasmania.
The Tasmanian monster, which washed in the 1960s, that was on the beach for 2 years.
Bringing back specimens was quite a job. The toughened hide of the monster would only yield to the axe. And when cut, the flesh gave off a pungent odor, similar to ammonia or an overripe cheese.
It turns out the Tasmanian monster, like all of its cousins, bears the same signature as the recent Chilean blob. Pierce dissolves a sample of the Chilean monster in hydrochloric acid, which tells him the type of protein it's made of. A peek down the microscope confirms the usual suspect, whale blubber.
You can see it clearly. It matches exactly the pattern of fibers in humpback whale blubber. It takes a long time for a whale to rot completely, and if the whale floats around long enough, everything rots away except for this protein, and this protein is almost undegradable.
Undegradable, unromantic, and undeniable.
They've all been identified. Any sea monster where there's been an existing piece that has gotten into a laboratory has been identified. And so far it hasn't turned out to be anything unknown, I regret to say. The lesson is everybody likes a sea monster.
One particularly beloved sea monster, or perhaps just a highly visible one, takes its name from the waters of Cadborough Bay near Vancouver, Canada. Based on hundreds of sightings, Cadborosaurus wilsey was introduced to science at large in a publication by marine biologist Ed Bousfield and oceanographer Paul LeBlanc. Its nickname is Caddy.
There's been lots of sightings of Caddy around Victoria and all along this coast and in the Gulf Islands and in Saanich Inlet. There's been hundreds of observations of Caddy over the last 100 years or so. So this is Caddy's playground. It's been seen in other places along the coast as well, both to the north and to the south.
Not only has Caddy been sighted, some people think a specimen actually turned up in 1937 at a whaling station in Naden Harbor. As the story goes, when the whale butchers sliced open the belly of a whale, out came this carcass, one unlike any they had ever seen before. As far as LeBlanc and Bousfield are concerned, it fits the description of Cadborosaurus to a T. The same reptilian-shaped head, the serpentine body, front flippers, and a fan-shaped tail.
We think that it might be a specimen of Caddy. Nobody's come up and said to us, "You dumb wits, this is a such and such." No. So it remains a mystery creature.
Unfortunately, the specimen disappeared, but LeBlanc and Bousfield feel certain that the creature exists. It's basically a giant sea snake, up to 100 feet in length, but with a pair of front flippers. Oh, and one other thing. It can breathe underwater.
It's got some kind of a aquatic respiratory mechanism, perhaps millions of little respiratory hairs on its undersurface, in which gaseous exchange takes place with the water surface.
Here's where mainstream marine biologists really get the heebie-jeebies.
There is no precedent for a water-breathing reptile. You're getting into some technicalities of reptile life, all of which mitigate against the monsters being reptiles, because they have to do reptile things. Number one on the reptile hit parade is breathe air.
The overwhelming mass of evidence, hard and documentary evidence, from hundreds of people over 3,000 miles of coastline and more than 2 centuries of time, indicates that there is no possibility that this is fraudulent.
Fiction or fact, sea serpent sightings have begun turning up farther south. And now the San Francisco Bay Area in California may be witnessing the birth of a new monster legend, the San Francisco megaserpent, aka Franny. Consider this sighting in 1983, witnessed by not one, but 5 people. A road construction crew were working on a scenic stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway just north of San Francisco, when their flagman radioed in an alarming call.
You need to check something out here. There's something really big coming your way.
something unusually large and fast was making a monster-sized wake out in the water. Marlene Martin, the supervisor, took the call and went to look.
I started seeing this wake, but it didn't seem like anything was pulling it. And all of a sudden it came up, and it just started splashing all over. And it seemed like it had about 3.5 humps. I never saw the end of it. I never saw the tail. The head was very difficult to describe, very ferocious looking. It wasn't a friendly looking creature.
But for life-changing sea serpent sightings, nothing quite rivals the experience of twins Bill and Bob Clark, who claim to have looked the terrifying monster in the eye and have become obsessed with documenting it. One winter morning in 1985, the Clark twins were taking in the view out to the Golden Gate Bridge when they had their first close encounter with a magnificent beast.
The Clark brothers in San Francisco Bay have been studying this animal for the past 20 years. I am convinced that their 20-year study of this species is one of the most credible of all studies that have been carried, including our own.
According to Bill and Bob Clark, their first run-in with the megaserpent took them completely by surprise.
We would come down here early in the morning before we went to work and have a cup of coffee, a donut, and then relax and look at the beautiful view in San Francisco Bay.
Suddenly, they noticed a group of sea lions. Then it hit them. There was something in hot pursuit. Suddenly, what they could only describe as a great sea serpent rose up out of the water.
Felt like I was looking at a dinosaur. I felt like I was a million years in the past watching this creature come through the water. You can see his head. And its head was sticking up like this, and it had these 4 coils directly behind its head. And as it was there, I could see it turning around, looking around, obviously looking for the sea lion. They were just sitting there frolicking. They didn't even know it was coming. Yeah. And then when it got right there, within a few feet, that's when it telescoped up. That's what's really shocked me, because I thought it was another sea lion. In an instant, this thing stuck its neck straight up. I mean, like a telephone pole. It was like boom, and then down into the group. Right into the group. Yeah, they all just started scattering. I could see the animal whipping its neck. Yeah, it's like fast. And I thought if it even saw us moving in the car, that it would crash through the windshield. So I told Bob, don't move at all.
Ever since their first encounter, Bill and Bob Clark have been staking out the bay and claim 8 different sightings from 85 to 87, including an astounding run-in with a juvenile.
And the last time we saw it was the time when we saw the baby with it. All of a sudden, this little black head sticks up out of the water, just tilts its head sideways, opens up its mouth, and it started growling at us. I could tell it was looking straight at us. And it was like a growl and a hiss, because it was more like a rah, rah.
Then, after these dramatic encounters, nothing for 17 years. But the Clark twins are nothing if not patient. Finally, in January of 2004, they got a new video camera, and while scanning the bay near Alcatraz, they caught this, what they think is a megaserpent thrashing about in the distance. They sent their video to Dr. Bousfield.
The movie sequence shows this animal moving steadily from right to left for several minutes at a fair speed. Sea snakes don't occur in this part of the world, and they're far too small. Birds are far too small to fit this image as well. So imperfect as this video camera result is, by a process of elimination, the probability is high that indeed this is a Cadborosaurus-like animal.
But what would our forensic video specialist think of the Clark's Cadborosaurus? We asked Grant Fredericks to take a look. Because it was shot on a long lens without a tripod, he stabilizes the sequence by giving each frame a firm point of reference. When the camera shake is minimized, What Dr. Bousfield and the Clarks believe to be a single large serpentine animal in the distance is more clearly defined. The alleged serpent is made up of many objects moving in formation.
They're not connected. These are separate individual objects that are a different size, a different shape, and that are not moving in unison. They're moving apart from each other.
What kind of objects? Something in the foreground of the video is a dead giveaway.
My common sense tells me that it acts like a bird, it flies like a bird, feeds like a bird. It's probably a bird.
Bill and Bob Clark are undeterred. They know what they saw, and nothing will keep them from looking forward to the next sighting.
I'm just watching the way.
My instruction to the jury would be, use your common sense.
Three smaller.
It's mostly the shape of the head.
Don't take somebody who is passionate
One sea serpent
about
of this type.
their evidence.
An animal whipping its neck. That's like fast.
Look at perhaps other explanations.
An otter, for example, or a beaver.
We don't have 12-foot beavers in Okanagan Lake or 12-foot otters.
Without a carcass, the debate over lake and sea monsters will rage on. In the absence of hard evidence, the appeal of monsters seems undimmed. Whether they plumb the abyss of our oceans and lakes, or just the unfathomable depths of the human psyche.
Lake monsters are useful to tell us something about what people's hopes and dreams are.
Not allowing the possibility of a biological life form living in this lake and just shutting the door, and it's a very sad indictment of where science is going. Where has the spirit of discovery and adventure gone?
No sea monsters have ever shown up. As soon as one shows up, I retract everything I've said so far.
I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that although it's extremely rare, the animal is there, if you can only find a way to catch them.